Hello and welcome to today's episode of Rock Enroll, the enrollment marketing podcast created by Vision Point Marketing. I'm Katie Campbell, the Chief Client Officer here at Vision Point, and I'm joined today by our newest marketing strategist, Rebecca Stapley. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here and talking with you.
Oh, same. Well, to start, want to kind of start a new tradition of asking everyone who joins our podcast, but would love to hear a little bit about your relationship to higher education. We are a higher ed specific marketing agency, and after working here for a few years, I have found that each vision pointer kind of has their higher ed origin story. So I would love to hear a little bit about yours.
Yeah, thank you. It is. It's so funny, and I do love to hear these stories. And there's so many common threads, but they can be in so many ways completely unique.
Totally.
So for me, I grew up just kind of having a lot of respect for education in general and learning and curiosity. And when I always knew that I wanted to go on to higher ed, but when I got to that point in my life, I didn't really have like a map or know the way. And, I actually was very kind of really truly on my own, even in that I didn't have family to bring me to college visits. Many of them, it was a lot of independent just learning. And I'm really grateful for the people who did show up and help me. And one of the people that really stood out was when I was going through my admissions process, the admissions counselor at my alma mater, which is Denison University. And they just went above and beyond, Katie, like to make me feel like I belonged, to really give me a look at the school. I flew out by myself. I got to do an overnight and stay with a host. I got to, have an interview, my interview admissions, which was really actually just a natural conversation and kind of like emotional and really getting to have someone take interest in me. And it really stuck with me in many ways. And then when I did make it there, that was my first choice school. I got accepted. Yay. I had an opportunity. That same person who interviewed me offered me a job in the admissions office.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was really incredible. And I worked in admissions. My 4 years there, sometimes a little bit more involved, sometimes a little less involved, depending on, what was happening academically. But I got to be a part of admissions and kind of see behind the scenes. And I loved being able to help other prospective students. I loved learning more about our alumni and even families. And then when I graduated, they didn't want to get rid of me completely. So I continued to do what they called alumni recruiting. So at Denison, it's the Denison Alumni Recruiting Team. And so even when I wasn't working there and I started at a media agency, I was still doing college fairs and interviews here and there for people regionally. And I had that aha moment that many of us like higher ed pros now had, where I'm like, I could actually get paid to do this. Like this isn't a career. This is something that I can do. And maybe I don't know exactly what that will look like or how that'll take shape. But it really set me down a path of wanting to be at that time in admissions. And so that's exactly what I did. And when I was back home in Rochester, New York, where I'm located, just really got to start meeting people who worked in higher ed and eventually, getting offered a position in admissions and in enrollment. And it was a dream come true. Like I still remember getting the news on the phone when I got that job, like just sitting down in the backyard, feeling like, wow, is this real life? I get to do this. And I think there is something very, very good about the work that so many people are doing in higher ed.
Yeah, oh, love that. And what kind of a full circle, I mean, takes you through so many different phases and chapters of your life with this connection, not only to education, but also kind of the work it takes to actively engage with education, whether that's for your own personal self and your journey or as a professional. So speaking of that professional side, once you got involved with higher education as part of your career path, what did that journey look like?
Yeah, so it's a beautiful journey, and that journey looked like starting an enrollment and really just getting to learn in admissions. And especially I was at a small private institution, and when you're at a small institution or maybe just, part of an admissions department, I got to see everything. And my director of admissions was just so generous with his knowledge sharing. Shout out to John Mordacey.
Love
He
it.
just really shared everything that he knew with me. And, physically, our offices weren't that far. And if I had questions or just we had something fascinating we wanted to talk to, he would just share and he would give me that time. And I really valued that. But while I was there in admissions, learning all the things, traveling all of the places, and recruiting students, I also realized that I was naturally drawn to marketing.
Mm.
And is this message that we have, or even these marketing materials, are these effective? Is this what students need? Is this the best way to be doing things? And so I had ideas and I shared them, and they led me to some interesting places. So this was around the time where blogs were really gaining momentum and popularity. And I eventually, pitched this idea of launching a student blog to use as part of our marketing. And so I did that, and it led me to about halfway through my time there to actually then join the marketing team full time. Now, in between this, Katie, there was a lot of different things. So I
Many
managed our
hats,
student,
many hats on and off, I'm sure.
so many hats. Like I led our student ambassador team of like 75 plus tour guides. I launched our content creation team. I got a grad degree in integrated marketing. So, but essentially, I started in enrollment, found this love of marketing, and then was in this really great, nourishing environment where I could let my creativity and collaboration and work with students guide me. And it eventually led me to work full time in central marketing, where I worked doing, among other things, our social media management and strategy, and launching the college's first giving day, and continuing to direct a team of student content creators. So, what started as that blog just turned into the student content team that I got to train, lead, and that was the biggest honor and fun for me.
Incredible. So, working, you mentioned kind of overseeing the social media strategy and execution. And as you made your way into central marketing, I'm sure as a small private school up against not only other small private schools to capture students' attention, but larger four-year schools or just parents association with different institutions in the area. I'm curious to what did you see work well? What actually was able to like capture a student's attention in that traditional undergraduate space?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a crowded space. But I think there are some things that are just they're timeless and they work. And I think it might sound simplistic, but it is knowing your audience and having empathy and respect for that audience in the marketing that you produce and the content you create, even the digital experiences from the website to the view book. It needs to be thoughtful, it needs to be intentional. And to do that, you have to know your audience, and not in a clinical way. You really have to have empathy, put yourself in their shoes, and not make assumptions about what they're going through. And that is the type of content, when you can do that, that is creative, that actually is worthy of attention, is worthy of you like slowing down your scroll in your days. So I think really keeping that audience at the forefront is the key. And then we could go into specific content, but at a very high level, I think that's a piece that I will never get tired of talking about.
No, I think you said it so well. Sometimes I feel like that is a notion or a phrase that people can think is back to basics or simplistic in a way, but it is just so critical and key to then all other avenues that we go down, whether that's content, whether that's messaging strategy, whether that's channel selection. When we are looking to genuinely engage with a user, I love this combination of empathy and respect that you mentioned for their experience, because they might not get much of that, or they may not get much of that from the people who are trying to market and sell to them, which is what they are bombarded with all day. So
Yeah.
to approach a user relationship or an audience relationship from a place of empathy for their challenges or confusion that they might have over the process. You talked about how you had to do a lot of this yourself. I was in similar shoes, and it's like, I'm a 17-year-old kid. I'm doing the best I can. And I'm going to try to figure this out the best way that I can. But having an institution that would try to relate to that sounds actually quite refreshing, as back to basics as it is. It's quite refreshing.
Yeah, I think it's essential. And I think there's a shift in the energy. And I think that students understand. And I think the schools that we see, really like excelling and doing really well, they've taken the time to get to know their different audiences, whether that's understanding the experience of current students so that they can better communicate that to, students who are just starting. I think that's where we see really great things starting to happen in those institutions that understand the importance of this empathy and respect and understanding for your audience. You can have the most flashy and exciting creative, but if it doesn't come to the heart of what your audience wants, needs, and also feeling. I think, we put on these hats where we think, and I'm guilty of it too, like that I am, we're intellectuals, we're in higher ed, and somehow like we're just completely unbiased and feeling sort of thing. But there's science behind our decision making that is so linked with how we feel. So when we actually step into that, for this purpose, the enrollment journey, perhaps, when we actually step there and think about, well, what are those pain points? What are the feelings driving this? Then we can get and unearth something that's really transformative. And if you're thinking about the lens of your institution, unique. We really, that's what we're going for, right? And that's the hardest piece.
Yeah, I'm could not agree with you more. I'm a big believer in this concept that marketing is kind of this brainchild between economics, almost the study of decision making, plus psychology as to like the emotional tax and feeling of the decisions that we end up pursuing. And when we think of how that translates into a marketing context, it's almost, how do we appeal to the rational side of people, which economics is all based off of, yet also the variability that goes into everyone's days and lives. And so when that changes, I'm curious to your reflection, just even thinking on the past few years of the pandemic, when those kind of the things that you want to connect with your audience on, when their life is changing so epically and quickly, how can you quickly and epically change your marketing content or strategy to relate and empathize with these new challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, and it's not easy. But I think the key is never to make assumptions.
Mm.
Especially coming off, the last 5 years and even everything that we've seen through like the pandemic. I think that you really have to adopt this growth mindset. And, even as someone, I check myself as someone who has, years of on the floor, like on the road behind the car admissions experience. It has changed so much. What it means to be looking at colleges, that experience, even that decision making of, do I want to, should I go to continue my education, has changed in so many ways. So I think it's so important to never make assumptions, and to really just be curious and go straight to the source. This is why I love what we do on the other side of things now, and kind of enrollment marketing from this side, is that we get to do discovery and research and open feedback loops with different audiences, do different modes of really seeing what the reality is for these students as they go through these journeys and seek different things. And I think that is the piece when you really discover and learn new things, and don't just have that fixed mindset about this is what a student's like, this is what my audience is like, this is what they need. When you challenge that within yourself, that's when you're going to get to a really good place, and you might be surprised at what emerges.
Yeah, love that. I think the idea of not making assumptions is so applicable to all audiences. I feel like I started this question with traditional undergrad, but I think everything we've talked about is also so relevant to adult learners, graduate students, and their influencers, parents, guidance
Yeah.
counselors, other guardians. I'd be curious if making assumptions is one, like I'd put that in the potential mistake column that we'll want to avoid. What are some other common mistakes that you saw kind of working directly on the ground or on campus in higher ed?
I think another one that maybe there's a few, and I think one is kind of in that same realm of assumptions. But if you have a really siloed organization, or even just some conflict between teams, there's a lot of assumptions about, well, that's just not going to happen. We're not going to be able to work with athletics, or alumni is just doing their own thing. And in the same way that I would say challenge assumptions when thinking about our audiences, challenge assumptions when you're thinking about your on-campus teams. I was a part of some transformation across campus, and I saw, how much things can change in a really exciting way in terms of creating an infrastructure for collaboration and sharing. And you can't assume or just defeat yourself. You really have to come at it with curiosity, again, empathy, and understand too that things, whether it's marketing or relationship building, that trust takes time. And you have to be, put in that effort in different ways. So I would say, thinking about that at an organizational level. And then if we back out a little bit more to the industry level, kind of as a third layer on top of that, I would say a common mistake I see is just being vague and very general. And I think that might be linked hand in hand with like audience assumptions, and just having, what do we say, three under a tree, or like, certain things that you just see over and over again. And it's not to say, but I think the magic happens when you really challenge yourself to go away from what is general and generic, and really keep asking why or what, and getting very specific and finding those storytellers and weaving in storytelling that is very focused on your institution. So keeping it from just feeling like a sea of sameness, to doing the work and asking, well, why? Or so you say that, community is a big part of our campus culture. How?
Mm-hmm.
Is that true? Show me, like, what does that mean? And just keep going specifically, almost like a toddler, like asking why, how.
Exactly.
It can be maddening, but it works.
No, absolutely. That kind of constant challenge of what's in it for them. And I think that goes back to your point about knowing your audience so well. And I feel like in higher ed at times, coming into this industry from not working in higher education, one of the things that definitely caught my attention was some of the conversations we would have with different institutions. You would notice the gap between what we believe as the institution is true versus what is actually true, or what our students believe, our prospective students believe is to be true.
Yes.
We had one campus partner that they had this very core belief that they were viewed as outdated, that they were viewed as behind. And actually, we then did a market study of both internal and external audiences. And the internal audiences said, yes, we are dated, we are behind. But then the external audiences said none of that. And it was just very much we couldn't go off of this assumption, because if we had built a whole marketing campaign that was how our audiences viewed us, we would have been wrong and tone deaf. That was not that was not what our audiences were thinking. That wasn't our starting place. And so we were actually able to start from a different place and have a much more well-received message that sparked better action, because it was driven into the core root of how our audiences perceived us. But that on-campus conversation is so interesting that you were talking
Yes.
about, and how these different units work together. Um, I'd be curious to kind of, as you have seen different admissions, PR, Marcom, departments, athletics at times, whoever, student services, maybe it's advancement. When it comes to how all those departments can best work together to create a unified prospective student journey, any tips, any tricks, anything that you would love to see kind of across the board?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think again, you're gonna find out it's just the foundations. One of the biggest parts and tips and tricks is have that infrastructure for sharing information and communicating with one another. So many times, and I think when we think about partnering with whether it's, different parts of an institution, there's this really important piece of actually backing up and realizing that you want the same things. You're there maybe in different roles, but at the end of the day in higher ed, we're very like service focused and, all about serving our students. So I think that it can really help to back up and realize that, wow, we have a lot more in common and probably a lot of shared goals. Um, and that when you think that way, and when you start opening up the lines of communication, building relationships, sharing, as that starts to happen, you're actually stronger together. So, it is true for many institutions and certain roles that you're doing a lot of different things. You can be stretched thin. Um, and so sometimes there's this feeling of almost coming into yourself and like, if you think about it from, again, maybe that feeling place of like, oh, I'm so overwhelmed, I don't want to invite anything new in. But if you take a moment or two and deep breathe, or like see that bigger picture and realize with a few simple changes, maybe even as simple as a shared Google Doc between departments with bullet points about what's new this week, you can actually make your life easier and better and help your students more. And I know that's a very simplified example, and we could go more into depth about what it looks like, but it really is about just creating opportunities and being intentional about sharing information, resources, and ideas. I mean, that is the essential piece, that sharing. And it does take, it takes listening, and you have to, listening and compromise are necessary. And so you have to have some patience, and you have to really be able to focus on getting to that, just 10% better every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. It is a process. These are organizational structures and flows that have been built off many years of success. It's like they worked for a time. That's why they've continued to be built this way. But I do think it's more and more important, very much to what you were saying, that from a user's perspective, from a prospective student's perspective, they have no idea where these walls are or these points of handoff would be. To them, it is one seamless linear journey. And because of that, it's very much this reminder as to thinking from that student's perspective. How is this cohesive? Where is this broken? And how do we make sure they never feel it if it is? How does this kind of come off as that user journey that's actually very, almost, you want it to be easy for them in a way, so that they are encouraged to continue to take step after step after step and end up as an enrolled student for that university or college.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting, what I'm thinking of, Katie, as you're saying that, is on the flip side, on the institutional side, like remember too that, we have connection as individuals for wanting that experience for our students. And I will say one of the things that was really moving to me was as I got to meet different campus constituents, everyone from health and wellness to, athletics. I don't think I met a single person that didn't in their heart just care most about the students and what we were offering them in some different way. And that's, again, if you can come back to that, then we're more able to start to break down and change these processes so that we can do the other thing better, so that we can make that, and even what we define as the journey. I think that starts from, again, maybe before you even have that question emerge of, do I want to continue my education, to beyond graduation. It all becomes more cohesive when you start to break it down and really focus on, the things that are most meaningful and important.
Love that. Same goal. It's less Game of Thrones, more Avengers. And I
Yes.
definitely think that too, going back to what you said about as you're questioning all of these marketing messages or potential proof points that you'd put out there, how valuable it would be to have that information from student services or athletics or on campus housing so that when you're thinking through what's in it for them, you can pull direct stories or data points or benefits that these different campus units offer to be able to share with prospective students or current students. Absolutely. Um, you mentioned something in your intro that caught my attention, which was that you not only oversaw kind of social media and so much of the marketing effort, but also on-campus tours and your student ambassadors. I'd love to talk through a little bit about, when I think of that group of students on campus, visits come to mind. And post-pandemic, and definitely throughout the pandemic, but still post-pandemic, seeing some trends of visits being down and students not
Yeah.
feeling as much of the need or pull to visit as many campuses as they did historically. So I'd be curious to thoughts on increasing exposure about campus life when those
Yeah.
visit numbers are down and they're not seeing it firsthand.
Yeah, I think it's so important. So, if you look at the numbers, we know that there's a strong correlation between typically campus visits and then students, having favorable impressions or potentially even deciding to come to your institution. On a bigger level, the campus visit is so important because on both sides, like, you want a match, and it's so essential to have that viewpoint into this authentic experience in that student life and campus life. And like, what would my life be if I made this decision and came here? And what I think is happening now is that, among other things, is, again, we've seen this kind of, I don't want to say slow, but the campus visit is changing as our students are changing and as their needs are changing. And there will always be a place for the in-person and that connection to community. But there is also this whole digital reality of networks and word of mouth and TikTok and, oh, my cousin went there, I'm just going to go over and visit for the weekend. So, we really have to broaden our lens to think about all of the different places where students are intersecting with that slice of student life, and then make it more accessible and relevant and really helpful for them. And that's going to look different place to place, but I think it means that we need to innovate, and we need to think about whether that is, yes, there's virtual tours, but there's so much beyond that. Like, how do students visiting your website, how do they experience a campus visit in more than one ways? Like, what does that mean? Or, do you have QR codes? If you just happen to find yourself on campus on a weekend, do you do self-guided tours? And also, is this whole world on YouTube and TikTok of current students who are opening up their world and giving a tour of their day in a life experience. And the eyes are there, like, prospective students are watching. And I always mention as a tip, don't just engage with the content. I think as marketers, it's really important to, again, put yourself in current students, go in different like TikTok, YouTube
Yeah.
searches, sprees, but then also look at the comments and see what prospective students or different audiences are saying, because it's often there in the questions that they're too afraid to ask, maybe one-on-one, or maybe they don't have the opportunity, but there's barriers that exist that keep them from campus. You can see that and then speak to it on a larger scale and make it accessible in new dynamic ways. And I think we're still kind of, especially with AI, still as an industry, it's exciting to see like what might that look like, and even how might it change from what it is now.
Completely. There's so much in what you said that resonates so wholly with me. One thing is, before higher education, I worked in professional sports marketing, and for some lower division teams that would struggle with ticket sales, they had this concept that would say, when you go. Like, that's how we find fans, is when you go. And the question back to that was always, but what if they don't go? So, and I feel like college campus visits sometimes have that same feel. I remember going through the college process, and a lot of students would say, oh, I just knew it. When I got there, I knew it. It felt right. So, what happens if you're not going there and physically stepping on campus to then make your decision in the end about where you're going to attend school? And I love the ideas of what you're talking about, which is that it is so much more than just kind of a virtual tour, like around a Sims house, spinning you around and taking you down different hallways. There are so many different other ways to experience campus and community and the culture of a campus. I just to, brainstorm some ideas with you. Like, I'm curious what comes to mind. Like, I'm very curious to who the first campus will be that like adapts to Apple's vision goggles and allows someone to like explore that way. Or the QR code idea I thought you brought up was great. If someone just happens to kind of, I think of urban campuses and how often you just stumble upon a building, and how that could be a helpful way to experience a campus. If you're doing an experiential setup, do you set up a mock fake dorm room to try to show off what living on campus would be like? There just feels like there's so many other ways to bring a little taste of campus to them. Um,
Yeah.
AI's mix in that will be game changing, I'm sure.
It will be. And I think there's one element that will not change. And I think this is where marketers, we can really excel and do some really great creative work. And that element is community and connection. And
Mm.
it doesn't matter if that's happening in a digital space or in person, but I think really understanding, like as humans, we are wired to connect, and understanding who are those connectors. So on campus, again, I had that privilege of working with current students, and current students, alumni, anyone who has that lived campus experience, staff, faculty in any way, they are so important. So sometimes, and even as we think about, how the evolution of these visits might change, be thinking about how can we bring community to new places, and how do we give these students or give these members of our community a voice, and then how do we just shine a light on them, and really let them take center stage. And if that as a marketer is maybe figuring out the tech or empowering them with the tools they need, or there's so many different ways, but it's really thinking about community and thinking about those individuals that make up that community, and how we can tell those stories, or how we can empower them even better to tell their own stories, because that's what's really going to resonate. Even when we think about the things the content that we love, Katie, it's when you can actually be a part of that, or be among other, whether it's Swifties or a certain book fandom. This community piece is so powerful, and I think we need to tap into that more in new creative ways.
Sign me up. We'll subscribe to all groups associated with any of those topics. No, but very much on that point, like this idea of brand advocacy. And, one of my mentors, we know the phrase content is king so frequently, and we kind of had this build of, well, community is queen. Like
Hmm.
community is so essential to driving content forward or shaping it or being the voice of it. I think your content is only as good as your ability to message it and translate it and articulate it. And so I'd love to kind of hear a little bit about your experience when working in the social media space or even across campus units, what the power of in-platform social listening has, especially in the idea of the ability to identify brand advocates or even, maybe a little external research when thinking of competitor insights.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And social listening is one piece of it, and it is important. And I think it also just, if you are on the campus side, like you're a part of it. So, it is when you are thinking about community, thinking about the ways that it comes to life. And for me, so for my experience, I had it from the central social media account, like working behind the scenes on that and be bringing the brand to voice in that way. But I also was our community manager for our admitted student communities. Now, this again is kind of dated. We had, a few different things. We did have Facebook groups, like closed Facebook groups, but we also, in my later years, developed our own internal app with its own community for admitted students and current students. And again, when I think about that, and how we can kind of serve that, it's again bringing the right people. So I knew that even in that role, whether it was as social media kind of strategist manager or in the digital community building, it is really thinking about what are the voices and the stories that need to be present? Who do we need to bring to the table for this community? And, that was a lot of current students. And then I invested in training for them because, again, challenge your assumptions. I learned the hard way that, just because students might be like younger than you, they're not necessarily knowers of all the things, and they don't just come out like, yes, I can edit a video and I know how to present myself or form my ideas. So I think it's so important to also give these professional development experiences to content creators and your advocates. So as you're identifying them, also giving them the skills, the tool, the support they need to share their voice and to be creative, whether that is through video, whether it's through writing, whether it's through even just understanding how to engage in a digital community in the same way that a lot of companies have like community agreements around Slack usage. These are the types of things that you want to think about for your digital community. And then you did ask a really good question about, like, how do we identify these advocates? And there are a lot of different ways. I will say that social listening is awesome. So you can just see like who's in the space already, who has a voice there. And also remember that some of the best influencers, and I say that in quotations, but are actually, when you think about the people that maybe influence your decision makers the most, it might be a friend. So we need to really shift and not just think about people with thousands and thousands of followings, but micro influencers, and realizing that everyone on campus is kind of like the king or queen of their own realm or ideas, and kind of seeing who those people might be. And, especially if they're already creating content and have some of these skills, like how can you connect? How can you develop it? How can you make it mutually beneficial? How can you compensate? Because creative content is not easy. And like, absolutely. And all throughout my time, I was really lucky to have the support to be able to financially compensate my students and give them flexibility as digital content creators. So identify them through social listening, also through referrals. So, build those relationships on campus. I had a really good friend who was in the English department, or like, just friends across campus. And I would just say, hey, who's in your classes? Who's really interesting? Who has something to say and maybe looking for a job? And you can also open it up and, hey, do you love content? Do you want to share? Do you want to make a difference? And let people like self-select and identify themselves. So there's a lot of different ways. And then once you have your advocates, I think it is really important to think about how you're supporting and compensating and really enriching their experience as well.
Yeah, love that. It is, there's just such the power of user-generated content, especially over the last few years. And as mediums have progressed so quickly, it's incredible how fast. I'm proud of higher ed in this way for, being fully on board with this swing. But I've seen so many videos just in the last couple of weeks of students doing the whole, I'm an NC State student. Of course walk on Hillsborough Street, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, we are getting on trends, people. We love this. But that comes from the power of having these brand advocates and the voice of a student, a current student in that, thinking back to kind of that top line note that you shared around understanding your audiences is such a more genuine connection than maybe me, the director of marketing, who could absolutely still offer things of value, but just might not be the voice that this prospective student is the most apt to hear. So how can we resonate with like that emotion of who they're expecting to hear from, who they would trust, and then leverage that to be able to communicate a piece of our community or a piece of our culture or a piece of university life and what that could be like?
Absolutely. That cultural relevancy is really important. And, we get that by really being in the places where our audience are being a part of these communities and kind of experiencing things. So yeah, that is such a good point and such an important piece.
Did you ever use it for some like offense is the best defense strategy or just kind of to poke around as to what your competitors might be doing too?
Oh, for social listening?
Yes.
When I was on campus, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, in my training, I would come, so I did training for my student content creation team. And a big part of that was what I think we at an agency would call like discovery. And I would absolutely be on platforms looking at what our competitors are posting and who is capturing that brand visual identity. And, I'm a big believer in sometimes seeing to understand and like having actual tangible examples. So I would just make slide decks full of examples. We didn't have TikTok back then, but Instagram for sure. And I would just screenshot and I would say, hey, look at all of these. Here's what I think they're doing really effectively. What do you think though? And again, that questioning things. And sometimes my students would be like, actually, I think that's really kind of like cheesy, or I don't really like that. And I'd be like, that's a great point. Like, what would we do differently? But yeah, you learn a lot about your competitors by the content that they're creating and what you can find through just in-platform native social listening. Just open Reddit, type your institution name, you'll be amazed. Same thing for TikTok, YouTube. You will get information, audience insights, you will get competitor insights, and it doesn't need to take a lot of time. Like, set a timer for 30 minutes, do it once a quarter, and you'll still be amazed at what you can surface there. And you don't need fancy or expensive platforms. In fact, sometimes they don't even allow access into some of the places that you could get just by opening an app on your phone. So I say, like, power to the people, like, just get in there, and you can't break it. Just start listening, see what's out there. And I find that it's a really good test too. You mentioned that perception versus reality, kind of like internal, external. And I have found that you can really find a lot of new things about like what is the actual landscape and how is your audience actually digesting what's happening versus what you think it is, just by spending a little time listening.
Yes, no, I could not agree more. I feel like one of the best ways to just get a understanding. We know we don't work in a vacuum. So, what is going on in this marketplace? What is taking away the attention of our prospective students? Like, just get in there. Reddit is one of those tools that probably took me the longest to get so familiar with over the years because just the way it's set up, but it is a wealth of information and rabbit holes to follow in many different areas. So love that advice. But to wrap us up, Rebecca, would love to kind of rapid fire a couple of questions with you just to get your quick take, your hot take, or some perspective in a couple of different areas, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do it. So just 4 or 5 questions for you. The first being, can you think of an institution that you are loving their work right now? College, university, system, 2-year school, anything that comes to mind in the higher ed space that you are like, oh, yes, loving to see that.
Yeah, you know who I'm really impressed with lately is the University of Montana. That team is amazing. And I had the opportunity to see them present at the Case Branding Conference last year. And what I love is I think they're really nailing that community piece and like really aligning it with what they're putting out, whether it's on their social media, their website, and really capturing that visual identity and that brand voice and what it really means to be a student there. They have some very unique traditions, and they've actually done a lot to increase attendance at certain events and also then to share it with their followers. So for that student who doesn't know anything about this institution, and they've been really intentional, and I think their team really, I mean, there's so many great things I think about that team: collaboration, creativity, but I think at the essence, they also have that respect and empathy both for their current student community, and then really tapping into that to showcase that for all of their different audiences in very customized and segmented ways. So University of Montana, definitely one to follow. The work of that team is phenomenal.
Love that. Okay, I will definitely check it out. Another question for you. If you could tell every university president one thing about higher education marketing, what would it be?
You learn from your students. You learn from your community. And your community can be your best problem solvers. So I think about that, and I think about our current students who understands the challenges, the triumphs, the anxieties more, who understands that better than current students themselves, but also, faculty and staff. It's just important to have a seat at that table and to have conversations and realize that as a leader, it is important to have a vision, and it is also important to understand that visions are constantly changing and they're adapting with the information that we take in. And for leadership to truly be listening and paying attention to your community, because they have a lot of great ideas and they might be the ones to really offer that perspective that helps you get from A to B and to think about that problem solving or even that messaging that we're really all working together on. So listen to your communities. They are important. They have a voice. They are who we're serving.
Love that. I feel like that will ring true with a lot of people listening in the higher ed marketing and admission space of just the power of that group of people and the power of that perspective. Two more for you. One is, do you have a personal mantra that you would like to share or a personal mantra you wouldn't mind sharing?
I think one of my personal mantras is just don't be a jerk. And I just think that it is so important just to be kind and to be human first. So one mantra that I really try to bring to my everyday life is just to be a human first and put humans first, and that kindness and empathy, they matter, and that I don't know, they enrich life for me. And I always just tell myself, just don't be a jerk. Just really stay open, stay curious, stay kind.
we have this great client partner for the last several years, the J.M. Belk Foundation, and we work with them for the Reconnect North Carolina campaigns, which is for community colleges working to connect with adult learners in the state of North Carolina. And they have this mantra that they say in meetings, and every time they say it, it rings so true. They say, "Do no harm." And it's like,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. Like, I love that that is like a cultural piece of your foundation and your endowment, yet also it's something that you bring so much to the table in every conversation that we have. And I think it is very resonant. Um, Last question for you. Now that you are on the agency side of things, getting to work with higher ed institutions across the board of all shapes and sizes versus being at one institution and kind of being on the in-house team, what's one thing that you're so excited about?
Oh, I'm excited about so many things, but I mean, at the essence, it's just so exciting to be, this is a really purpose-driven industry. It is very different doing marketing in higher ed, and I'm really excited, honestly, to help future generations of students by, offering really thoughtful, well-researched, and empathetic marketing strategies. I love strategies. I love creative problem solving, and I think it's important to me. It's just exciting to have all of these new resources, this phenomenal team of just brilliant brains in one place, as well as just this depth of research and methodology that we can bring to the table, and then to really be able to see that actually start to make an impact for future generations. And maybe it's the marketing effort that grabs the attention or helps someone to believe that, oh, this is an option for me, and there is support, or what I have, my thoughts, my feelings about this next step in my life, they matter. Like, those moments are the ones that are really important to me. So I'm very excited to be a part of that journey now for so many different types of institutions and different types of student populations.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Well, Rebecca, I cannot thank you enough for your time. And thank you to all that are listening. And I feel like this was such a great kind of conversation around not only getting to hear about your journey and experience, but also just with some really helpful tidbits for all those enrollment marketers out there who are very much in the thick of things right now, whether it is that they are dealing with FAFSA news coming later than usual, their application deadlines coming up or passing, preparing for fall 24 and very quickly winter 24, spring 25, whatever it might be. So thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time today. So glad you were able to join us. And if you have any more interest or questions in all things Vision Point marketing, feel free to check us out at visionpointmarketing.com.